Hello and welcome to Stand Up for Jehovah. Children, was it okay or was it not okay to have them? It always seemed a bit ambiguous, didn't it? I always remember that song that went, "They are gifts from God. He says use the rod." And I always thought it sounds a bit like they are gifts from God. He says beat them up. That's what it sounded like to me. Here's a really precious gift. Now beat it. Beat it if you love it. Now, if you give somebody a precious gift and say, I want you to beat it regularly, that would be appropriate if it was a drum kit, but not necessarily if it was a human being. I was a strong advocate of beating children before I had them. But as soon as I had a baby, I had this tiny little thing and I thought, I'm supposed to beat this? Really? Now, we all know that Thingy Jackson in the Australian Royal Commission really defended the fact that the Bible didn't mean beating at all. It was metaphorical. It didn't mean beating. It was just talking about discipline. But my mum's argument was this. If you read Proverbs 23:13, it says, "Do not hold back discipline from a boy. If you strike him with the rod, he will not die." How is that metaphorical? How is that just representing discipline? And then in the next chapter, 14, says, "With the rod you should strike him." And as we all know, our parents took that challenge up thoroughly, didn't they? And they had a beating competition. But back to the original question, was it okay or was it not okay to have them? There was a time when Jehovah's Witnesses didn't have children at all, and I remember an old lady in my congregation called Jessie Young, like a really, really old lady. She was like the old lady on Tom and Jerry, you know, with the real cute grey bun, and she was really short and very sweet. Jessie Young was like that, and she never got married and she never had children because she followed the guidance from the Watchtower about not having children. And the rationale was that when the Armageddon came, or the Great Tribulation came, and persecution came, that if you had kids, it would kind of weaken you, that when it came to the fingernail pulling time, if they were pulling your own fingernails, you could resist a bit more than if they were pulling your children's fingernails out and saying, "Denounce Jehovah." You go, "No, I'll never denounce Jehovah," but no, not the child, not the child's fingernails. Whereas if it was your own fingernails, you would probably be able to resist a bit more, unless you followed a strict policy of biting your own nails until they bled. And then I would have said, "Ha ha, pull these bad boys, you bastard," because there was nothing to pull. But really, the real reason for not having children was that people couldn't go out on field service easily if they had children, because your field service duration was limited to the length of a 3-year-old's bladder, wasn't it? Which was a good argument for many people to have children. So you could only stay out. He's got his underpants on backwards. Joe, off you go, son. So, having children was a reason to not stay out on field service too long, unless you were a real hardcore pioneer, like my mum, in which case you'd make your kids squat. Now, when you had to wee outside by squatting, as a girl, obviously, because as a boy it's easy, as a girl, there was a 98% chance that you would get the angle wrong and pee all over your pants. If you were as good as me, you would also pee all over your shoes. And occasionally, if you were exceptional, you'd score a hat trick and manage to pee on your pants, your shoes and your dress. And then your poor mum would be left trying to pioneer with a piss-soaked child. I'm sorry, Mum. I can only apologise. I've never quite been able to get the angle right, even as an adult. Now, there's a little caveat to this. My daughter, when she was very small, learned to wee standing up. This was when she still had a nappy on, so sometimes her nappy was so heavy that it would slide gracefully down her legs, and she'd step out of it, and then she'd run up to a tree or a fence and pee standing up. And I used to say to her, that's a really good skill. When you grow up and go to nightclubs, you'll need that. And suddenly, at the age of 5 or 6, she stopped doing it. Can't help some people, can you? So, the argument for having children as a Jehovah's Witness was, well, some people just had them, didn't they? I mean, they brought in a rule that said you can't self-abuse, masturbate, and you can't commit fornication or adultery, and you can't have certain positions even if you're married. But even aside from all those rules, some people still manage to fall pregnant. You see, if you were going to bring in a rule that said you can't have same-gender sex and you can't have the morning after pill, then what do you expect? You are going to get a few pregnancies. But what you can do is make it bloody difficult for those people who have been stupid enough to crack a few kids out. And so you could have really long, boring meetings and really long assemblies and no accommodation of children at all, like churches do with children's clubs to entertain them while you're learning about God, and really late bedtimes on a meeting night. You could just make life really hard for those people with children. Now, people like me, before I had kids, I was all for making life really hard for people with children because I didn't understand how hard it truly was. So I was the person who, if a 2-year-old turned round in mild curiosity, I'd go, that was me. And then I had kids, and I realised, kids are kids. They're not meant for sitting 2 hours at a time and being ticked off for everything. Jessie Young, who I mentioned before, the dear old lady who was akin to the old lady with the grey bun in Tom and Jerry, she wasn't quite as dear as she made out to the adults. She was a public teller-offer of children, and I often received the harsh edge of Jessie Young's mouth when there were no other adults around. But then she'd suddenly morph into the cute old Tom and Jerry lady when there were adults there. And I get that, because when you don't have kids, it's easy to be brutal and think that they're all just horrible little hellcats and rugrats. But when you have them, you realise that life's not that simple. Now, there are still people that are witnesses who aren't having children, like my cousin. And there are still people who are witnesses who have bloody dozens of them. And my main issue was, you should only have as many children as you can hold on to their hands when you go out on field service. Otherwise, you had to dish them out to other people, didn't you? It was always someone like me who didn't have kids back in the day that ended up with somebody else's rugrat. It was not a good move. Hello? So there you go, children or no children. I'm not sure what the ruling is now. I think they're still ambiguous on it. I think really they want people to have children because the only people who are staying in are born-ins, and because they're not getting converts in the first world. But they don't want to pursue a policy of advocating that people should suddenly have loads of children, because what about the fingernail pulling at Armageddon? You can't suddenly, after all these years of telling people not to have kids because it'd compromise you at Armageddon, start saying, oh, and by the way, our numbers are falling, so start cracking them out like good uns. So I think they've suddenly gone quiet on the child policy. And they've started doing nice cutesy things like the Caleb and Doodah videos, Sophia videos, haven't they? To accommodate the people who have been rash enough to crack a child out as a Jehovah's Witness. And I can't help thinking that they must be really wanting Armageddon to come soon so they can get the agony over of all the crazy, stupid rules that they've made in the past that now make no sense whatsoever. So children, I ended up cracking out too. Thank you for listening to Stand Up for Jehovah.